All right, welcome to week 4 of the Conscious Mama Cocoon. I can't believe we're already here in week 4. Today, our topic is acknowledging pain points, and we'll get into what that looks like. So before we jump in, I'm just going to do a quick kind of recap again of what we've talked about so far. So lesson 1, we really talked about the divine feminine, the divine masculine, the fact that we are here to become butterflies and to live a life of love. This is our birthright as well as our responsibility. And we're asked to learn how to both surrender, which is the yin, as well as take a leap of faith, which is the yang. And again, that's the do, be, do thing that we talked about last week. Lesson 2, we talked about really embracing the divine feminine because we are in such a divine masculine dominated society. So this is really about embracing the divine feminine through self-compassion, learning to integrate more intuition and all of that goodness into our lives. Sorry, I'm playing with and then nurturing, healing, gentleness, expression, wisdom, all of that. Lesson 3 was called Myth and the Call to Adventure, or that was really what we talked about. We must be willing to take a step back from the material world and from fulfilling others' needs in order to fulfill our own divine calling. So we talked a lot last week about how when you have a myth that you base your life around, that myth has an enormous impact on our lives. And many of us grew up with the myth that to be happy, we go to work, we bring home a paycheck, we have family, we please everyone around us, and then we die. And what we talked about last week was that there's an alternative to the myth, and that was really where we left off. So we're going to pick up right from that place again and kind of get into how the tarot is such a beautiful illustration of this myth that we can use to replace the one that we have been operating unconsciously under. So what we're doing is we are leaving behind the life of the caterpillar. So here we have, again, that picture that we used last week of a seeker leaving behind this grounded material world and starting to explore the less material, more spiritual, more impossible to describe world that is what is within us at all times. So there's certain things that happen on this journey that are somewhat predictable. But here's what we're going to talk about today are really the 7 habits of the caterpillar. And I believe that we all struggle with these habits and we all have to learn how to overcome, the tendency to fall prey to these habits. So the first one is victimhood. The second one is the fear of being alone. The third is scarcity mindset. The fourth is blaming external influences. The fifth is conformity. And then we have fear of change and black and white thinking. So these are really the habits that the caterpillar lives by because they all have a purpose that allows the caterpillar to stay small. And that's what's comfortable. The caterpillar understands caterpillar life, just like we as humans understand the ego-based life, the life based on the way of thinking that is dominated by feeling separate from everything else. So the 7 habits of the caterpillar are actually all, represented in the tarot, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about a really fascinating approach that was developed by Dr. Carol Dweck, and she came up with this kind of the 2 mindsets that all of us operate under. And I found this to be a very helpful kind of precursor to any attempt to change the way we view the world, because so many of us operate under this fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. And so what is the difference? Let's talk about that. So if we are operating under a fixed mindset, we believe that our basic abilities, our intelligence, our talents are just fixed traits. And that really we're never going to get any better because we were born with the skills that we have, and you got to throw your hands up in the air and just accept the lot that was given to you. That's the fixed mindset. The growth mindset is starting to see that all of these things, our abilities, our intelligence, our talents, can be developed with effort, with learning, and persistence. We can overcome our programming and transform by applying the growth mindset as opposed to the fixed mindset. So fixed mindset, everything is static. You were born with, these abilities and these skills and this intelligence, and beyond that, you're not going to get much better. It leads to a desire to look smart. In order to look smart, we then avoid challenges, because if you fall on your face, everyone knows that you're not as smart as you were pretending to be. You give up easily on obstacles because you don't want to be the one who didn't finish the race or didn't do that, so you don't even try, right? You see effort as fruitless or worse. You see criticism and you ignore the useful negative feedback completely and just deny that anyone ever gave you any negative criticism. And then you also feel threatened by the success of others. And as a result, people with the fixed mindset often plateau early and achieve less than their full potential. Okay, so this is this kind of like deterministic view of the world, that things just happen to them, that they're kind of a victim of the world. Meanwhile, there's the growth mindset. So the growth mindset leads to a desire to learn, not a desire to look smart, but a desire to have that journey of learning. So you then embrace challenges, you persist in the face of setbacks, you see effort as the path to mastery, you learn from criticisms, and you find lessons and inspirations in the success of others. As a result, they reach ever higher levels of achievement, and all this gives them a greater sense of free will. We have to learn to notice when we're thinking in a fixed mindset way. When we give up easily, when we're avoiding challenges, we're, ignoring useful feedback, that's only going to keep us as a caterpillar. To become a butterfly, we have to be willing to go right into the challenges, to persist in the face of setbacks, to continue to put that effort in, to learn from the criticisms, and then finally to find lessons from people who have done the same. So I wanted to just talk about that as just a quick little precursor to this whole thing, because if we think that we can't grow, obviously we're not going to. So it's so important that we notice when we're thinking in a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset way. So last week, we also talked again about the hero's journey, also known as the monomyth. This is the myth that we as light workers, as butterflies, as healers, as the incredible beings that we are, this is the journey that we all have to go on in order to, the myth that we need to learn to, embrace in order to go on the journey of becoming a hero or becoming, the person we've always dreamed of becoming. So we talked last week about that call to action and how we start to feel like there's this deeper purpose of life beyond the chariot, which shows that man who's just, solid but separate from the world. And then we move to strength, where we start to feel that there's something bubbling beneath the surface that's stronger and more capable than we ever realized. So once we receive that call to action, we have to decide if we're ready. And those of you who are watching, you heeded this call, or else you wouldn't be here. So you are ready for metamorphosis, and it's only going to get better from here. So next, a guide often shows up to help the hero on his journey. And that guide can show up in many different ways: teachers, shamans, therapists, friends, even spirit guides. And we face trials along the path, and we often come to a point where we consider giving up. And by understanding that this is a part of our journey, that there's going to come a time where we want to give up, we can face that, expecting it to have happened and being able to move through it in a way that's really, really peaceful. Ultimately, we persevere and learn how to find true balance in our lives, no longer losing sight of the spiritual that's always pulsating under the surface of life. This is the goal of the hero. The goal of the hero is to have one foot in the spiritual, one foot in the material, and to be able to move seamlessly between the two. Do, be, do, be, do. To move seamlessly between the divine feminine, which can only ever just be an idea, and the divine masculine, which brings it into a manifestation. And when we can hold both of those things in our vibration, we're capable of truly transforming and being that hero. So what we're going to talk about today is the Major Arcana again. So last week we talked about the first row of the Major Arcana. The Major Arcana in the tarot is an illustration of the hero's journey and the monomyth. And it's, especially if you view it as if broken into 3 rows of 21, with the card the Fool, its own separate thing. And we're going to talk a lot about the Fool coming up. Not today, next time. So the first 2 cards of the Major Arcana are the Magician and the High Priestess. Again, divine masculine, divine feminine. Okay. Then the remaining 5 cards in the first row symbolize the external pressure to please our parents, right? To please religious leaders, to please our partners, to please society in general, rather than following our own true path. So these were what we saw in last week's lesson. So finding our one true path. Again, we talked about this last week. Because our society and our senses are masculine and externally focused, it becomes so easy to just fall into the habit of doing what others expect of us, to just do, not really thinking about the why behind why we're doing what we're doing. This is comforting to us to stay in this place because we no longer have to take responsibility for our lives if we're just doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm not going to question it. That means I don't have to think too hard about what the hell this life thing is anyways and what my role is in it. When those of us who are questioning it know that the only way to get to the place we want to get to, which is that divine level of peace and joy and happiness in our lives, we have to be willing to take responsibility. As physical beings, we must manifest what is within ourselves in the outer world. But we have to find meaning in what we do first, or the actions are all for nothing. So it's very true that we have to work like a magician and bring things into existence and be creative and do and move forward and create. But when we don't step back and really ask ourselves why, then all of that is for naught. And we saw that with the Chariot last week. This journey is very personal. You are all already on this journey. And you can't kind of study this. You can't, we can study it like we're doing here, but to really see a result, you have to be willing to live this journey. And that's what we're hoping to do by being a part of this cocoon together, to support each other as we move through these very real, very trying circumstances over the next few weeks. So here we have the 7 habits of the caterpillar that we talked about last week. At the beginning of this presentation. Last week we talked about strength in particular. We're going to go into that a little bit deeper in a second, but that card, when it's not in alignment, shows up as the first, the first habit of the caterpillar, which is victimhood. Then we have this. So what this all is the second row of the Major Arcana, and this is about the journey of going within. And I want to give credit where credit is due. Much of this is inspired by 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which is by Rachel Pollack, which is a book I read probably 10 years ago and has just stayed with me. I teach this to friends. I teach this to a lot of different people. So I want to give credit to that. But what this is now we're seeing that these are the cards of the the second row of the Major Arcana. So it started with strength. Then we have the Hermit. Then we have Wheel of Fortune, Justice, the Hanged Man, Death, and Temperance. And we're going to go over some of the symbolism that's present, as well as just really how these cards can give us some guidance about this next phase that we're going through, which is really this going within, taking the lid off of our life and understanding what's going on behind the surface. This is how we overcome these habits of the caterpillar. So first we have the card again of strength, and we had this card last week. We talked about some of the symbolism here, so I'm not going to get too into that today, but this card is part of that initiation process and that call to action, which inspires the hero to start his or her journey. We are beginning to recognize that we have far more power within us than we ever realized. We are tapping into strength when we start to notice that life isn't feeling fulfilling. This is when we feel stuck, dull, or cut off from nature. We are releasing the power of our deeper self, not just identifying ourselves by the masks we wear. In order to tame a lion, you can't be fake. That lion is going to see right through that. So what's happening here is that we're letting our true self out more and more and more, connecting with nature, and again, acknowledging that we have a power within us that is way far greater than what many of us were raised to believe. Strength shows that it's possible to passionately yet peacefully enjoy life with hope and eagerness for a brighter future. So even though she should be scared, this card is a sunny, happy, inspiring vision, and she doesn't look scared at all. She looks very peaceful and just happy to be where she is. By aligning with this card, we learn to be more spontaneous and to co-create with life and to let these energies bubble up from our subconscious. Now, what about when strength is not in alignment? So when we're not identifying with the positive side of this card. Well, now we have this focus on the feeling of weakness and victimhood. So weakness because you don't think you're strong enough to handle life, and that's the same thing that a victim feels. It serves us to feel hopeless and anxious and defensive because then we don't have to take ownership for our own situation. We're recognizing that we are infinite beings having a human experience, and this allows us to tap into this vast reservoir of inner strength that will sustain us on our journey. So again, when strength is not in alignment is when we start to feel like we are victims to whatever the circumstance is. And anyone who stays too long in that victimhood mentality is not going to move forward in their learning. And it's so important that we take a step back and we look at, what is my thought process here? Am I feeling empowered, or am I feeling like the world is out to get me? And we really truly need to learn to trust that the situation that we're in is there to build our strength, and that is the goal. And again, that brings us back to that fixed mindset, growth mindset. People who are afraid of their own strength or don't believe in their own strength, don't believe that strength can be developed, they're going to avoid situations of spontaneity and growth. They're going to feel dull. They're going to feel, depressed. And this is where strength can help, shift that energy and start to get us moving in the right direction. So the next card in the second row of the Major Arcana is the Hermit. And this is really the card of the spiritual mentor and guide. And I mentioned before, we both encounter these guides, and there's a lot of different forms they can take. And we also learn to embody this role ourselves and become comfortable with it. This card depicts the need to withdraw from the outside world and from society in order to awaken our inner selves. Again, we mentioned that we have to be willing to turn within. So unlike the Hierophant card, which we talked about last week, that showed religion telling us exactly what to believe and putting the people in the religious hierarchy above the rest of us. But the Hermit symbolizes a personal connection with the divine, understanding God through personal experience. So when you are aligning with the Hermit, you are acknowledging that you have power to connect with spirit, to connect with God, and to understand the bigger picture more than you realized. You also often do find someone on your journey who's going to help you along, and being willing to let them into your life and ask for help and ask for guidance as you move through this process, because it's not easy and we all need help. And that's one of the biggest lessons of the hero's journey, is how to ask for help. So what about when the Hermit is reversed? When we're not in alignment with the Hermit, we are afraid to be alone with our thoughts. This is the card of meditation, silence, and solitude, which is where so much of life's messages come to us. Yet many of us are terrified to delve into this unknown and to just sit with our feelings and just be. The Hermit may not be an active member of society, but he knows his role is to help others nonetheless. And when we are in alignment with the Hermit, we know that we must seek our own truth and no one else's. And that we have to do this really on our own. And that's where the big shift comes. And the fear here is the fear of being alone, the fear of ending up alone, the fear of not being able to handle things because you're the only one who understands it. This is a really strong feeling for those of us who are on our path, because the people around us are not going to understand everything that we're doing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But needless to say, this is a really, really, really powerful card when you receive it. All right, so now we have the Wheel of Fortune. So the Wheel of Fortune serves as a reminder to all who embark on this path of metamorphosis that our fate ultimately rests in God's hands, and that there is a bigger plan for us that maybe we can't see, but that is there to help us grow, and it has a bigger purpose than we can ever imagine. And that's why this wheel is spinning in the sky, and it's surrounded by the four fixed signs of the zodiac. And it's just turning and turning and turning. And it says tarot, tarot, tarot around the circle again and again. Or Torah if you go the other way. Excuse me. And actually those symbols that you're seeing are very important to this hermetic, what's happening as well. And I'll bring that into another lesson too. So when we connect with the Wheel of Fortune, we're asked to accept the rise and fall of the wheel, because there are forces at work that are far vaster than our own awareness. The wheel of life doesn't become visible until we step away and notice the divine intervention always working in our favor. We learn to ride the ebb and flow of life, finding the still center, knowing that things are going to be good some days and bad some days, and really asking ourselves, what defines that? So when you're not aligned with the Wheel of Fortune, we cling to life and we try to hoard material possessions. And often when you're thinking of a wheel, the clinging is what happens when we cling to the outside of the wheel. And that is just going to make us dizzy and sick, and it's a lot of work. But if we move to the center of that wheel, we don't have to cling anymore. It can spin around us and we are centered, and it's not taking us on this horrible, horrible, cartoonish, not so joyful ride. What happens when we're not in alignment with the Wheel of Fortune is that we develop a scarcity mindset, because we're so focused on keeping what we already have that we can't make space for the new to come in. And it's funny because the Wheel of Fortune, your fate is really what it refers to, but it's very tied in to money. As we saw with those of you who watch the Wealthy Lightworker series, again and again and again, we found that by releasing our need to cling to things and giving and allowing, that is when more money comes into our lives. That's when more abundance comes into our lives. So really, this card is about recognizing that the world is an abundant place and that it's conspiring to make our dreams come true. We are reminded that the only constant in life is change. So we have to ask ourselves, when things change unexpectedly, do we react or do we respond? And obviously responding is much more beneficial. So that's where the scarcity mindset comes in. So now we have the card of justice. We're almost there. I know that this is a longer lesson, but I have a lot to cover. So this card falls in the middle of this row, and it serves as a balance point for the entire Major Arcana. When we embody the energy of justice, we take off our blindfold and truly acknowledge the truth about ourselves and our lives. You see that the sword is straight up and down. The scales are perfectly balanced. There is a sense of divine judgment that's happening here. Excuse me. We are reminded that each choice and decision we have made has created the reality that we're living. So we are what we have made ourselves to be. We can only break from patterns by becoming conscious of them. And justice is the embodiment of this truth. So we can only break from our patterns when we face them head on, look at them in the eye, and acknowledge, I made decisions in my past that brought me to this place. And it really, going back to the victimhood kind of thing of the strength card, this is when we say, I am not a victim. I chose to be here. Whether we chose in this lifetime or our previous lifetime, we chose to be in a situation, so it's something that's meant for me and my journey. When we're not in alignment with justice, we blame others or the divine for the things in our lives that aren't working out the way that we want them to. We refuse to acknowledge the way that we have co-created the reality we're living, and instead we choose blame and denial. When we step back and think objectively about our lives and the direction in which they're headed, only then does wisdom truly develop. We have to step back. We face the truth that every decision we make has a reverberating effect on all of life. So again, this is the habit of blame. And we're overcoming that with justice. So now we have the Hanged Man. So I love this card. This card shows that moment of surrender when we stop identifying with the old view of the world. It begins to feel like everything is turned upside down. Our values, our relationships, our identities, our truth. This card is when we finally have gone through enough things that we're finally seeing there's so much more to this than I ever acknowledged before. And it's kind of this place of peace, even though we still feel like it's kind of heavy. He's hanging upside down by his foot in a tree. He's not happy, but yet, is he? Despite his compromising situation, the Hanged Man expression is peaceful, even smiling. He's aware that life is blessed and surrenders to this truth. And he's been through some trials and tribulations and still chooses positivity and peace. And what I love about this is that he no longer cares about what others are doing or how they view the world, because he has found his own truth. If you were hanging by your foot, you'd probably be struggling, right? We all would be. But this particular, level in our development is when we kind of go, maybe I don't need to freak out. Maybe I can just surrender and trust that everything's going to work out. And you see he's just radiating this inner peace. So what about when the Hanged Man is reversed? Well, this is when we're afraid to fully commit to this new perspective of life that's bubbling within us. We are still concerned about the opinions of others and conforming to society. By recognizing that this new truth does not need to be defended, but radiates out from our inner being, we realize that what others think of us is none of our business. And we have to be prepared for criticism from those who aren't able to see the world that we do, the way that we do. And this is, again, conformity. We talked a little bit about the fear of being alone. This is similar to that as well, where it's really difficult sometimes to know that what you're doing is not going to be looked at as popular, but that it serves a purpose, and doing it anyways and seeing the bigger picture through that. So now we have the card of death, which is probably one of the most controversial cards in the tarot, but it does not mean a physical death. It means the death of the ego. And I love this card because it hints at the truth that we are immortal beings that can never truly die. And it's kind of showing that even if we turn to skeletons, our souls live on. And the thing that this card is really meant to show us is that, again, our ego must be allowed to die. And each figure in the picture handles this differently. You see the man just knocked down dead. He was so associated with his ego that he thinks he just died by letting that go. He is probably actually perfectly fine, but he thinks that the pain is so great because he's so closely identified with his ego. You see the woman over in the corner, she's at least sitting up, but she's still not really sure that she can handle it. Then you've got the priest who, you know, because of his robes and so forth, he seems like he's protected, but he doesn't even really seem to be looking at death in the eye. And then we have this child who's just offering a flower to death because the child understands, or the child intuitively understands, that life is just, you know, death is just a natural part of life. There's no way to avoid developing our ego. It's just something that happens as we grow. But we do have a choice whether to identify with that mask or allow it to fall away. This is the uncomfortable and often terrifying truth. But the sooner we're able to accept that death is a natural part of life, the sooner we can resurrect. So what about when death is reversed? This is when we identify too strongly with our ego and we face life with some cynicism. And we have this fear of change. We're worried that if we stop behaving the way we always have, life will lose its meaning and nothing will remain the same. And you won't find happiness because you let go of all the things that you thought were making you happy. But we have to be willing to go through this fire and face the fear of death in order to get to the other side, which is a light rising in the distance. So that is the habit of fear of change. Finally, we have the card Temperance. This card symbolizes the resurrection and transformation, the culmination of this turning within that we've been talking about. We've gone down into some of the depths of our psyche, although we can, of course, go deeper, and we do in the third row of the tarot. But we've now returning enriched and empowered. We are balancing the energies of the divine feminine and divine masculine, embodying the middle path and balance in all things. When you get this card, we recognize that extremes are not necessary, and that through reuniting various aspects of our personality, we can follow our personal path with faith and commitment. But when temperance is reversed, when we're out of alignment with temperance, we are incapable of seeing the interconnectedness of all things. We get out of balance with our lives and we choose self-destructive actions that are not sustainable and ignoring the need for temperance. So temperance is literally like the middle path. So we either get too rigid or we get to be too kind of lazy and lackadaisical. And that's the key here, is figuring out how to find that middle path. So we talked before, again, about the mindsets. We're stuck in a fixed mindset rather than acknowledging how far we've come in all of our blessings. And as you see the path behind her, you know, or him, how far they've come. And this is so important to recognize. When we reconnect with temperance, when temperance is in alignment, others are amazed at how well we're able to handle what life throws at us with joy and love. And that's another criticism that we often will get when we're following our path, is people don't really support you the way that you used to think you needed, because they're just like, oh, she'll figure it out. And it's true. And there's a part of us, our ego, that's still like, oh, I wish someone would help me out with this. But ultimately, you know, we handle life with joy and love. And that's really breaking up the black and white thinking. So tying it all together, again, it's so important to see our lives as myths. And by operating under this, you know, prevailing myth, we can better model, you know, our journey in a way that reflects these truths of, this is what every human has to go through if they want to be enlightened. They have to go through this process. Once we recognize that this path is largely the same for anyone who chooses to awaken in this lifetime, we realize that while we must go through this metamorphosis on our own, we're never truly alone. And this was a huge aha moment for me when I first started this path of spirituality, because I felt so lonely, and yet I had these kind of things, these roadmaps that I could learn from, and the tarot is one of them that's given me a picture of what to expect next and what to look out for. And again, we must be willing to come face to face with our personality in order to transcend it and to figure out what are our tendencies, what are the things that hold us back, what are our caterpillar habits that really get in our way, and how can we transform them into powerful practices of self-love. And from there, by transmuting those habits into love, we can really create the life we desire and find our bliss. But we have to be honest about what our pain points are, what things in our lives trigger us and make us feel small again, rather than build us up and making us feel high vibration and incredible. So here is our homework for the week. So I would like for you to write 2 examples of situations where you chose to align with 2 caterpillar habits and how it affected you. So 2 of the 7 caterpillar habits we talked about, which I could probably try to go through again, but I'll post some of that on the Cocoon page. So coming up with examples of times in your life where you chose that particular habit of thinking rather than, you know, the higher vibration version, and how it affected you. And then choosing, and we're actually going to do the automatic writing exercise yet again. This is to get you guys a little bit more comfortable with creating a morning practice. That's what's coming as part of this process, because we have to, again, have the do. We'll be doing things out in the world as we figure out personally what our path is, but then we also need to have that time to reflect, to allow, to meditate. And we're going to do this automatic writing exercise yet again. I'll do it with you, and we are going to see, you know, really what comes through. And then we're going to write an ego dump too. So you can choose when you want to write this. You do not have to do it in the morning. You can do it anytime. But I want you to just write down a bunch of things that just are pissing you off. Things that really, like, your ego is just, oh, I can't stand this person. And really let yourself feel all the emotions that we're talking about that are associated with the habits of the caterpillar, because we can't just deny them. We have to move through them. So we have to express some of this junk. So write it all down. Write down all the nasty thoughts that are floating through your head, all the fears and negativity you can muster. And then we're going to take that piece of paper, and we're going to light it on fire. And you get extra points if you find someone who will videotape it and post that on your personal social media page. I'm just coming up with this now, but this is how you're going to start to share with the world that you are transforming. So I want to see if anyone else will take my challenge and light that piece of paper on fire in front of, you know, someone taking the video, and post that on social media and talk a little bit about what that process means for you. And then you're going to contact your accountability partner. Now, listen, I would love for you guys to get on the phone with each other again. And I really think it's extremely, extremely valuable. If it has to be emails back and forth, that's fine too, okay? So I understand that you're busy, but I really think that you would be missing out to not compare your experiences and to continue to work together. And we're going to switch up our accountability partners another time. For now, I'd like to stay together for at least the next 3 weeks, to see how things grow together, okay? So you're just going to share, and then again, you know, in the Facebook group, share a little bit about what's happened in this coming week. Share about what epiphanies have come through, what things have shifted in your life. All right, so that is it for the lesson itself. I hope that this was valuable. I know it was a ton of information, and I'm going to turn off the recording so that I can chat with you guys personally. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope that that was valuable.